Welcome everyone to the second event in our 2021-2022 History Talks speaker series. My name is Erin Quinn Belcho and I am the Lacey Museum Curator. Also with me tonight is Carson Rouse, our new museum assistant and educator. We bid Felicia a fond farewell as she moved on to a new position. She will definitely be missed, but we are very grateful to have Carson. She comes to us from the, do you say it's Shield Museum?
Yes, Shield Museum.
Shield Museum in North Carolina, where she was an education program specialist. This is actually her very first day of work, so I'll be taking the lead tonight, but if you want to say hello, Carson, you can do that.
Hi, everybody. I'm super excited to be here today.
Thank you. So this evening, I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. The museum is on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Nisqually and Squaxin Island peoples. Lacey and the South Puget Sound region are encompassed by the Treaty of Medicine Creek, signed under duress in 1854. We respect and affirm tribal sovereignty, and as part of the City of Lacey, we work with the Nisqually and Squaxin Island tribes in government-to-government partnership. Before we begin the program, I'd like to share a bit of museum news. I want to remind you that the museum is open, and these are our hours. We're open Thursday and Friday, 11 to 3, and Saturdays, 10 to 4. We've been really enjoying getting to see visitors again, so come on down. I also wanted to share with you our new exhibit that is opening soon. It's called Righting a Wrong, Japanese Americans in World War II. It's a Smithsonian poster exhibit on the tragic incarceration of innocent Japanese Americans during World War II, and it's a very important and powerful story, and I hope you'll come and check it out. We are also continuing to document local stories during the COVID pandemic, and we are still asking people to submit photos that illustrate something about this time. Here are a couple of examples from our submissions. The photo on the left is one submitted by Cynthia Pratt, and it's of a whirligig that her husband made during lockdown. Its jaw and tail moves in the wind. And on the right, submitted by Jennifer Reffner, is a photo from their family's time spent outdoors. We'd love to have more, so please continue to send those in. I really wanted to share with you a recent addition to our collection. In case you weren't aware, Lacey used to have a rodeo. That's right. In the 1940s and 50s, Leo Harrington and his family put on a rodeo at their Mountain View Ranch. And the grounds were located near what is now Golf Club Road and 26th Street. This action shot shows an event called Saddle Bronc Riding. Bryce Baker at the left is the pickup rider, and he assisted the rodeo competitor here, Gene Tyler, by riding next to the bucking horse at the end of the ride and providing stability while the competitor jumps or swings free. They were both competitors from Eastern Washington who came to Lacey for this rodeo. This was a great find on eBay, which I was so glad to find. Before we begin, I would like to share with you the next speaker in our History Talks series for the season. You can join us on Wednesday, November 10th at 6:30 p.m. Our speaker will be Michael Mays, Professor of English and Director of the Hanford History Project at Washington State University, Tri-Cities. That was my cat. Oh, thank you, COVID. Anyway, he will be reflecting on 75 years of a nuclear world with his presentation, Legacies of the Manhattan Project. We are still hoping to have this as a hybrid, in person and online, but we'll have to see how things go in the next month. Keep an eye on our website and Facebook for more information. We always make the decision a week ahead of time, so there's no reason you can't know in plenty of time. So like with our past history talks, you can register for future programs when they become available by going to our website at laceymuseum.org and then click on events. And alternatively, you can visit the City of Lacey's Facebook page where all of our speaker events are posted as events. Now let's get on with what we're here for. We are going to mix things up a little bit tonight. We are giving you the opportunity to share your questions live, audio only, so that we can try to create more of a dialogue experience with our speaker. So like in previous history talks, this is set up webinar style. So there's not a chat box, but there's a Q&A button for most people that will be at the bottom of the screen. You'll still enter your questions in the Q&A box as before, but when your question is chosen, we will call on you and you'll be given the opportunity to interact with our speaker. Normally, we also hold questions till the end, but again, this is meant to be more of a conversation. So Nessie will let us know when she is ready for questions at the end of a section. And we may not get to all of them and so that in the interest of time, we can keep things flowing, but we hope to have more time at the end to finish asking any questions that you would like. And as long as Nessie is okay continuing, we will keep going until we're done. All right, now let me introduce our speaker. Annette Bullchild is an enrolled member and elder of the Nisqually Indian tribe. On her mother Zelma Kalama's side, Nessie is descended from Nisqually, Cowlitz, and Hawaiian ancestors. On her father Orvid MacLeod's side, she is descended from Puyallup and Scottish ancestor John MacLeod, a Hudson's Bay Company employee at Fort Nisqually. She has worked for the Nisqually Indian tribe for over 30 years. Her husband, Merlin Bullchild, is from the Blackfeet tribe of Montana, and she has 2 sons, Curtis and Aaron, and daughter-in-law Janice, Curtis's wife. Nessie's hobbies are beading, weaving with cedar, and sewing. She is currently the Nisqually Tribe Archives and Tribal Historic Preservation Office Director. Nessie, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We look really forward to hearing what you have to say. And now I'm going to bring your slides up.
Okay, thank everybody that's joined in on this presentation tonight. A little bit nervous, so we'll get through this. So my presentation is titled Conversation about Nisqually Indian Tribe. I've learned through other presentations there are many questions about the Nisqually Indian tribe, past and present. Therefore, with this presentation, I would like it to be a conversation with the audience. So I have the PowerPoint with slides. I'll go through them by section. And then at the end of the section, I would like, if there's any questions. If not, we'll continue. And then at the end, if there's any other questions that we can cover, that's how we'll run it. So next slide. So the first slide is the location map of Nisqually Indian Tribe. I have done other presentations where I've gotten the question of where is Nisqually Indian Tribe located. So this is just the map that shows where Nisqually Indian Tribe, the Nisqually Indian Reservation is. The Nisqually Indian Tribe has over 800 enrolled members. The reservation is located between Yelm and Lacey, Washington, located along the Nisqually River. I will start the presentation and then talk about some history. The tribe also has a website if there's anything not covered in this presentation. Next slide. So Nisqually Tribe's government consists of 7 tribal council members voted on by the General Council, and they serve staggered terms. Our current tribal chair is Willie Frank III. The tribal council are elected for the administrative duties needed to handle the daily tribal business. The General Council vote on major tribal issues at annual meetings and consist of enrolled voting members. In the photos are from left to right, Antoinette, and she's called Maui Squally, she's the vice chair, Shay Squally, the 5th council member, Jackie Whittington, the secretary, Leanna Scott, 7th council member, David Ayal, treasurer, Willie Frank III, chair, and Hanford MacLeod, 6th council member. So that's our current tribal council. Next slide. So this section, I would like to go over the Nisqually enterprises. This is the first one is the map of enterprises on and off the reservation. So you can see the kind of small, but the squares show, where we've had enterprises on and off the reservation. So the enterprises fund tribal programs and provide employment for our tribal and community members and non-tribal people. Some of the enterprises are casino, convenience stores, gas stations, and smoke shops. Some of the funded programs include education, youth center, housing, hatcheries, construction, fiber optics, water treatment complex, and a new medical facility. So that's what our enterprises fund, you know, these certain programs from anything, you know, the profits that we make. The next slide. So this slide just shows the Redwood Casino that was, you know, opened up 1977, and some of the expansion, which you see on the right, is, you know, they put in the parking lot and increased the casino. Next slide. This one is the Nisqually, the tribal res market and the casino. So you can see how it's built across the street. That's our newest. We had a small store on the other end of the res or the casino, but when they expanded, then they moved the res market over to the other side of the road. So next slide. So this one is the Tribal Youth Center that was opened in 2010. And then the Shellfish Farm, and that was opened in 2010. So these are some of the other programs that the tribe has, you know, for the tribal reservation. Next slide. And this is when we have the public safety complex, and that was opened when they broke ground, and then it was opened in 2011. And then the new tribal center, and that was opened in 2013. So this is another area where, you know, we've put the funding back into our tribal facilities, so that help, you know, they're for the tribe and help with any kind of, especially now with employment. So there's a lot of employment that goes on with these programs. Next slide. And this is a wastewater treatment plant that we have that was done in 2013, 14. And then the cemetery expansion, and that was 2014. And that was to help clean up and make, you know, just better place for, you know, when the cemetery, because it was pretty run down, fencing and all of that. So they've just added to that too. And that was another thing that was funded through our enterprises. Next slide. And then this is the newest. This is the new tribal medical facility. And so this one is kind of our pride and joy right now, because the clinic and the dental and we have a substance abuse program. They were all in separate facilities. So with this new facility, they've all been combined into one. And now they have state of the art, because now they have room. So we found that at the tribe, when you build facilities, a lot of time you outgrow it before you ever get into that. So this one is really nice because it's done a lot for our tribal people, you know, for the medical and dental and all of that. So now we have, just like I said, more state-of-the-art equipment that we can put in this facility. So that one is our Nisqually Enterprises and Funded program, if there's any questions.
All right, if anyone has any questions on that section, you can ask them now. We can also take questions at the end if you haven't thought of any yet.
Any other thing I'd like to bring up alongside this medical facility, as you're looking at it, would be to the left. That's where we're going to be putting up our new Elders Wellness Center. So that'll be a facility for the elders with help, you know, for therapy and places for them to go. So that's the next facility that'll be going up, and that'll probably be done in a couple of years.
Okay, great. We have a couple of questions. Mariah Candler has a question. We're going to unmute her and I'm assuming that's a girl, I could be wrong, and let her ask her question.
Hello, my question is, what kind of programming does the youth center provide?
What kind of programming?
Yeah, correct.
Right now with COVID, they don't have any, but in the past, they had events that, you know, the youth could participate in. They've had, they did have, right now, they were getting into helping with tutoring. You know, they provide tutoring, and they provide a safe place for, the kids to go after school. And then, like I said, they've always done the facilities to get youth to participate in, giving them a place to go and training. They participate with the Canoe Journey. With COVID right now, that's what's so hard, is it's just been a facility that they've done drive-through lunches. They helped with the COVID, the schooling, when they were helping kids with the lunches and getting the laptops. So they provide that. And when it's open, it will be, it'll be open to public for the events. And then they do have the youth members and community that can go there and participate. They also have a computer center that, the kids can go to work on homework and do that when it is up and running. They do a lot of cultural things for the youth, do have different instructors come in and do that at the youth.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to take a question from Eric Ebel now. John is going to unmute him.
Hi, Nessie. This is Eric Ebel. I am the chair of the City of Lacey's Historic Commission, and I just first of all wanted to say thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited about tonight's presentation and learning more about Nisqually tribal culture. My question tonight is, are there any plans to develop a Nisqually Tribal Heritage Center or museum similar to the Squaxin Island Tribe or the Suquamish Tribe?
Right now, what they were doing before COVID, we do have a culture center, and it's located down on Mounts Road. There's a golf course there. I think it used to be Fort Lewis JBLM golf course. I think it's open to the public. Right now, that's where the tribe's culture center is, but it used to be the old Braggett farm. Braggett had a dairy farm there. So it did have buildings. So what they were working on is, and they will be continuing that, is they are making it into a full cultural facility with more places for them to teach and really do a lot more, for artists and just all that kind of stuff down there. There is a plan for that, and that's another facility that'll be going up. I think they got funded for that. And then as far as the museum, they're looking at places where to locate it because of the tribe's land. The other map we showed where they had enterprises, that's what they're kind of going through to make sure there's a place for it. So that's the other thing they're doing. But they first started with like the priority, like the medical facility. They're trying to get the elders facility because our elders are always in need of, therapy. And then same thing with the museum. So that is coming up. It's just finding the location and getting all these other things done and put in place.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to now take a question from Loretta Sapanen. I hope I said her name right.
Yes, Nessie, I'm very pleased that you're presenting to us tonight. It's quite helpful. And I'm wondering about tribal court. Do you have a tribal court? And is there a special facility for tribal legal jurisdiction activities?
We do have a tribal court. It was located across the street by the casino, but they've relocated it down to the public safety complex where it should, it's just more, that's where it should be. So they do run the court along with I guess you just call it the jail, the public facility. So those two are run together. The jurisdiction is more on reservation. The only other jurisdiction is they do contract with other public facilities or tribal public safety facilities that, bring their people over when their jails get full, and so they need a place for them to go. So the tribe does have a big complex that they can utilize that to help with overflow of these other facilities. That jurisdiction is only between, they have signed contracts between them. So on who they can house. So they don't take, anybody with felonies. They're just, misdemeanors like, DUIs, that thing. So, but they do house other ones, and that's where they have that jurisdiction on both, so they can take them.
Thank you. All right, I think we'll go, still have more questions, but I think we'll go back to the PowerPoint and we can get back to more questions later.
Okay.
All right.
So next slide. Okay, this slide is Treaty of Medicine Creek, 1854, and Puget Sound Treaty War, 1855-56. On the left is the Medicine Creek Treaty. I recommend anybody that has questions on concerns or things for Nisqually Indian Tribe that they read the Treaty of Medicine Creek, 1854. I've recommended that people read it article by article, because sometimes this answers the question of what happened, what led into the Puget Sound Treaty War. And it does have to do with the Medicine Creek Treaty. So when you read it, there's a lot of things that have been put out there, about the treaty. And, it's like the tribe has a reservation and got all this, but you have to look at it as to what the tribe gave up. Jerry Ekram did a book, Remember Drums, and he's done that on the Medicine Creek Treaty. And one of the things that always stuck out to me was when this treaty, and he put that, it's in his book about the tribes were not there to negotiate a treaty. They were there to sign a treaty. So there's been all this discrepancy and talk about, well, you got a treaty, and it's kind of just a word that's been kicked around a lot. And so that's why I recommend people to really read the treaty to see what's in it article by article and how it affected the tribe. And that when they did sign the treaty, there was a lot, there was a language barrier. Tribes, signing a treaty in December, which is a cold month, tribes were used to going, the way the treaty was presented was that, we're going to give you gifts, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. I said it was more constructed like a potlatch, which they understood. But to have these people come there in December of 1854, they expected more. There was a language barrier, and like I remind people, you're evacuating buggy and horses, so the weather was bad. So they were just made these promises that when you got there, this treaty came about, and it wasn't, what was promised. So that's why I always bring that up with the treaty, that there was this time a treaty, before that there was peace. And then you go into the Puget Sound Treaty War. The war was not against the settlers. It had to do with, when you look at the treaty and the location, where they promised the reservation for Nisqually was on Nisqually River. But when the first place for the reservation, it was up on the bluff, where they were away from the river, they were away from their prairie, they were away from all their hunting, gathering, fishing areas. So, that's what we've always tried to clear up. That's kind of what we've done on another panel with Fort Nisqually, because that's not what the war was about. Chief Leschi has always, they've always contended he never signed the treaty, which, because of the location of the reservation, where he was promised that his people would be, that's not where they were going to be put. So he did walk away, which I believe. He wasn't a war chief. He was just a normal tribal person, and he wasn't elected as a chief. Him and Quamuth were sub-chiefs, and they were given that right by Governor Stevens. The tribes did not select them as chiefs, and they were not Leschi was not a war chief. So there's a lot that has to go in with that, and I really advise people you have to look before the treaty, go into the treaty, what happened, and then you can go into the war and what happened, because it wasn't against settlers, it was against the location that he wanted for his people. So next slide. So now you go into the exoneration of Chief Leschi, and that was in December 10th, 2004. These are brochures that we made up after the exoneration. So they give details of what happened at the exoneration, why it was done. You have timelines with the court, the timeline, the judges, the attorneys, the timeline, and Kautz's map. You have a biography of the witnesses, so they kind of did this trial to prove that, what they accused him of was done at a time of war. So this was just going by the facts and what people, found out about it. And even in Fort Steilacoom, which was a military fort, they've talked about they wouldn't even allow them to build the gallows to hang him there. So they hung him further down, and there's a marker there today about where he was hung. So there's a lot of things that weren't brought out. And so in our history, that's what we're trying to do, is bring out what really happened, especially for our next generation, so that they have that things that weren't written by other historians. And we're trying to get all of that in the schools so that all of this is corrected for the tribe. So I don't know if there's any questions.
Helps if I unmute myself. We've got some questions left from last time. Let's do one from that, and then we can give people a chance to, if they have any questions about the treaty, to put those up.
Okay.
So we'll take a question from Michelle Zabala Turner.
Hi, yes. I just had a question about if scholarships and college education was funded through the enterprises and other funded events of the Nisqually Tribe.
Yes, they do have that program set up. And also, what I would like to remind the public of is the tribe, because through the casino, they have charitable funds that you can apply for. It's more for nonprofit, but if you have, any of these programs that can qualify, they go through them every year. And, a lot of these groups, benefit from that. But you can go to scholarships. We do have an education department, and that's on the website. And you can contact Jeff Wall is the director, and then they have other employees or staff that will help you and guide you through all of that when if you need help. So that's why I'm saying the best place that I tell people to go to when it comes to Nisqually Tribe is their website, and you can find all the programs and the contact information there.
Thank you. We got some questions that were written into us ahead of time. One of them is the land that's currently occupied by the Nisqually Tribe theirs forever, or is there a catch? For example, only if a certain number of people live on it, only if a certain percentage of tribal members are registered, etc. Could the land ever revert back to the US government? And if it could, is there anything a non-tribal member could do to voice our opinion for it to stay with the tribe?
So the answer is no. The tribe, it will never revert. It is a treaty, and it's the law of the land. So it will always stay with the tribe. The other thing that has happened is, and I think it's further down, people can look up the Allotment Act, the Dawes Allotment Act. That affected the tribes, and it's sectioned out the reservation to individual families. And you can go online and look that up. You can find that. But when that happened, that was one of the things that could have affected the tribes and had the land revert back, because then it opened it up for individual families on the reservation to sell that land. So they did do away with that act so that they couldn't continue to do that. So as of now, all the land that the tribes have will stay with them. And anything that you buy off reservation, if it goes into trust, then it stays with the tribe also. So that's like when you see some of these enterprises that are off reservation, you can go in and get it put into trust because the tribe owns it, but there's a process and there's time on it. But that's kind of what a lot of the tribes are doing, is trying to buy back the land so that they can increase the reservation for their people. Because some of these tribes, like you look at Puyallup tribe, who is more in the city, it's hard to get housing, everything is kind of split up. So some of these tribes are like that. The Nisqually's fortunate that they're out here and they do have, more land that they can put housing. You know, we've built houses and apartments, you know, for the tribal people. So right now, no, the land stays with the tribe. The one point that I do always want to go back to, and I'm still not done with it, is when they condemned, and that was on the next slide. I'll always call it Fort Lewis, but it was Fort Lewis in Pierce County, condemned some tribal land that was in the treaty, that was a reservation, and it was put over in the Fort Lewis. And that's something that I'd always like to get back, because it really never should have happened, but it did, you know, in the past. So I would still like to fight for that, because it was property that should have stayed, because of the treaty, it should have stayed with the Nisqually Indian tribe.
Okay, the next question is someone who doesn't have their name in there. So it begins, we had you, John. You can go ahead and ask your question. I'm not sure what your name is. Maybe they don't want to ask their question. It's an interesting question. Well, I'll read it.
Okay.
It says, what was the extent of the Nisqually tribe's general domain before the treaty signing? Where did they then overlap with the Puyallup and Squaxin tribes?
Actually, you know, this has always been a discussion that, you know, it's always open to interpretation. So tribes are very respectful for each other with their territory. There were no borders. You know, your borders were actually the mountain, the rivers, you know, the sections. So tribes usually stayed within their, because like I said, you have to remember there's no cars, you know, there's only, they used canoes, they traveled by water. The horses came in and they used the horses, but there was a lot of trails. So a lot of the trails today that the tribes use actually are roads now. You know, they've built roads on them because that was the easiest way to get from point A to point B, get over the passes, that kind of stuff. So generally your territory, which we called it, because nobody owned land back then, you know, you lived off the land. The tribes used it for whatever they needed, their food, their medicines, their, you know, for their baskets, their clothing, you know, all of that was provided. And so you stayed within your territory, and generally you were respectful of that. Even today on the canoe journeys, when you travel with the canoe journeys, they go from the US to mostly up and down the coast, but to Canada. You know, they're very respectful to the point that, you know, you request permission to come aboard, to come ashore when you're in their territory. You know, that's just the way it is. So a lot of the tribes where there was overlap had to do probably with fishing, some of their gathering areas. And they were just called, you know, usual or, you know, traditional lands. But you knew, like, you know, we say, if one tribe, you know, for some reason, they didn't have enough food, you know, enough deer, enough plants, you know, they would go into another tribe's territory, but they always asked permission, you know, to go in there because of a need. So at the time, when you look at all of if you look at what the tribes gave up, you know, this was like 2.2 million acres of land that was ceded, as they call it, in the treaty, you know, to go on a reservation that was, I think, 1,012.80 at first, you know, so there was these things that happened, and that's why tribes, you know, I'm very adamant about with the tribes that because of them trying to move them onto reservations, you have tribes that have become extinct because they were absorbed into another tribe. But that's what they did, was relocated. So, you know, relocation is a big issue because we still have descendants from these tribes that are still in these other tribes. But territory, you knew where your territory was. There was no border. You know, you were allowed to go hunt and gather. I remember when we were little, you know, we went up to Quinault, dug clams, you know, we went up different places and picked, you know, collected and gathered. So, you were just respectful to the other tribes, and you only took what you needed. You know, you never, like I said, tribes really gathered in seasons, so you never wiped out, you know, any of your sources or resources. So yeah, so there was, like I said, there was never any borders, there was just territory.
Yeah. All right, I think we'll move on to the next section.
Okay.
Come on,
The next slide.
I'm
That actually
trying.
should
There
have
it
that.
goes.
Yeah. So what do we have? 13. Yeah. So that one, 13, that shows what I had talked about previously, how this is the Nisqually Reservation 1884 allotments. That was when they did the Allotment Act. So actually that whole section was just the Nisqually Indian Reservation when they signed the treaty. With the Allotment Act, that's what they did, was separated it by families. And then the families were allowed to sell it. And some of it happened because, you know, at the time, you know, everything you had was taken away. So you didn't have your places to gather, you know, and hunt and fish and do all that. So, you know, a lot of them ended up selling their places because trying to, you know, make a living. So that's one of the things that devastated. But luckily the tribe held, you know, the Nisqually tribe held on to it. Some other tribes weren't so lucky. Some of the, you know, they were left with very little and had to really rebuild. So, but that's the allotment map. On the right, it kind of shows what the tribes ended up doing. A lot of them went to hop fields. So actually, this is some of my family in there that my grandma and my grandpa worked in the hop fields, and a lot of the tribal people became farm laborers. I remember growing up on farms. You know, my mom and dad worked in farms, so that was how they made a living. Okay, this slide, and this is just to show you after, this was, so this slide 3, Nisqually Tribal Area Treaty Time. So what you see down in the bottom, permanent reservation of 1856. If you look up and to the left, that was the proposed treaty reservation of 1854 that Isaac Stevens wanted to move the Nisqually people on. This is what Leschi was so angry about, because they weren't by the river. It was up on a bluff. If you look into the, and I'm not really good at a lot of that, but if you look into the adjoining land claims, the land claims that were bordering that was Ben Shaw and James Swan. James Swan was an Indian agent. Ben Shaw was the one that was the interpreter for the treaty. So there was always the assumptions, because in the treaty, they were allowing for internships. They wanted tribal people to be interns on these properties. And so that was kind of the thought, was that by moving in there, you know, these people had these, well, I guess you'd say apprenticeships. The tribal people would help work on those, because at the time they were helping, you know, they were working on the forts and the trading forts. So, you know, this is why you look at it, the piece of property that's there compared to what was promised in the beginning. That was the part that Leschi went to war on for his people. And then the slide 6 is this one shows where the land was condemned. So if you look at that same piece of property, the permanent reservation, and you go over there, you'll see where, you know, Fort Lewis or Camp Lewis at the time condemned that much, you know, they condemned that part of the reservation, and what was left was just the little side there on the river. That's what I would like to get back, but, you know, we'll see.
Oh, did you want to stop at that section?
No, we
Or
can go on, because that was kind
Okay.
of what I messed up on that one with the.
All right. Okay.
Okay, so slide 15, bringing back the culture. This one is what's showing after the tribe had to rebuild. So on the left is my grandma, who's picking berries. You know, that was what I remember us do, you know, as a family. We go up, and so like I said, seasonally you harvested, you went up and picked berries, you picked your plants that you needed for your baskets. And I always remember going up in the mountains, you know, they taught us kids, you know, that we all had to go up and do our part. And then on the right, that's the part of the Nisqually tribe's first salmon ceremony. that they're bringing back to help with the youth, to teach them that. So that's on the Nisqually River, and that was a first salmon ceremony. So that's like bringing back the culture and traditions. The next slide. So this one it's at the Wahilou Indian School. Every year they do, but due to COVID, some of this hasn't happened. But they do a first salmon ceremony, and this they do at the school along the river. They also invite other schools to bring their kids, their students there to watch and participate in this first salmon ceremony. So this is where they're preparing the salmon. They're teaching them, what has to happen, and then they'll go in and do the dinner and that. So this is a part of that, bringing back the traditions. Next slide. So this one is Cedar Gathering. So on the left, I'm looking at that's my husband, Merlin, who's in the back there, helping in their peeling cedar off of the cedar tree. And you only take a quarter of it. You don't take the whole bark off the tree. And you'll see as you go through there how the tree heals itself. And you can tell that somebody's taken that bark, but you don't ever take the whole thing. And then that's my niece that's carrying the strip after they've gotten it off. But we've tried to get it out there to let everyone that we can talk to. If you have cedar trees, before you cut them down, would you please contact us, because we would love to go in and take the bark before the tree comes down. If you have cedar trees that you just want to cut down and you have no plans for them, we can always use them, because we use them for paddles, carvings. We use everything of it, the bark and the wood. So we try to get it out there that if anybody has those and you're trying to get rid of them, please contact us, because we would love to go in and get these, supplies before, you do away with them. The photo on the right shows them like how they split the bark off or peel the bark off. And then this was a strip. This is kind of your goal, is to get the long strip, because this is what you would use for hats, so you don't have to have so many pieces. You would just have longer pieces. So once you get to this point, then you have to peel the inner bark from the outer bark. And you always use the inner bark for your baskets, your hats, headbands, clothing, anything that they use cedar for weaving. So what this shows is, this is my niece, and then those are her nieces. So we're trying to teach them, bring back how they have to go in. So it was pretty funny. The first time they came, they all had on these nice pants, these nice hoodies, their nice shoes. They had their hair down. When they got there out into the woods, we were like, this is not a glorious job. You're going to be going through, sometimes it's real mushy or marshy. So I says, and you're going through bush and, spider webs. And so they learned that, no, we don't wear our good clothes when we come out here. But they've really enjoyed, going out and learning this, because it makes you appreciate when you do see a basket or a hat, what goes into it, how much work goes into that to gather that cedar. So it was really good for them. The third one with the pink, the Nike, she's, she was just small, but everybody has to peel the inner from the outer, and you have to use a knife. We're watching, and pretty soon she brings out like this big old Bowie knife, and she's scraping, and we're like, what are you doing? Never got cut, but we just sit there and slowly peel, do all of that. So it was interesting to watch her, just her choice of knives, but she handled it very well. And that's my daughter-in-law, Janice.
Oh,
And so
go
this
back.
one, no, that's okay. So this one is at the tribe. This is my daughter-in-law, who's a master weaver. She's from the Hazel Pete family in Chehalis. So we go in and we have classes, and we help with employees and anybody else that wants to participate, showing them how, we use cedar, and she'll teach different classes. And that's at the table, they're weaving, and then some of the people that are waiting, to get in there. So on the right is one of the Nisqually baskets. That's kind of what, your goal is further down the line. But that one's made out of, that would be cedar root, the root of the cedar tree, because it's a little bit thicker on the designs. Okay. And then this one is another one bringing back, they annually, before COVID, we do the canoe journeys. And like I said, these go up and down the coast, Washington and Canada. And so this one on the left is when we were out practicing. They go out and practice every year on the canoe. So you can see, there's a lot of youth involved. They're really interested in learning, getting back their culture and participating. And they really enjoy it once they get out there and they get on the water. It's just kind of, it draws them in and they like going out. The photo on the right, that was where we went up to Calamidays. So this was the same thing, the youth participating, bringing the canoe up the river, and then, teaching them the protocol of, coming ashore and participating, showing people, what the canoe journey is about. So a lot of people like that when they can actually see, the youth on these and participating in it. Next. So these are projects. Oh, is there any questions, I guess, from that?
Did you want to take questions on that section?
Sure, if they have anything.
Okay. I got one here for you from Jessica Ray Nunez.
I'm trying. Is it working? I'm so sorry.
It is. You're
okay,
on.
thanks. Yeah, Nessie, I was wondering if there are like educational opportunities for non-native persons to learn how to do things like weaving and such. I feel like maybe you said that, but I wasn't sure if it was just for persons who are related to the families of Nisqually or if it's open for outside persons also.
They're trying to open it up before COVID. As I spoke earlier, we're working on getting a bigger cultural center facility so that you have more opportunities for these different, like I said, for carving, for regalia making, for basket, and then they would open it up. But right now they haven't, and we just haven't had the facility. So currently it's open to Nisqually tribal members and community. But with that said, every year, my daughter-in-law, her family, they have the Hazel Pete has a weaving work. Well, it's like a weekend. I think they do it. Or it's 2 days. I think it's a Friday and Saturday. But they do open that one up to the public, so you're welcome to go. I think it's around May they do that, but because of COVID, they haven't. When they start that again, they will. And what they do is they bring all these different teachers that weave different baskets. And so you're able to sign up and go in and learn, if you just want to do certain ones, that's what you do. They sell kits. So you buy the kit and then you sit down and, learn with the teachers there. So that one is open. They also have a national basket weavers, and that might come back also after COVID. Same thing, that one's open to the public. They do go to different reservations so that it's, they can connect with more people. And then sometimes, like I said, in the Chehalis, the Hazel Pete, they will have they'll open one up to just maybe just for them to teach if anybody has one. They kind of do that for, I would say, people that have unfinished baskets, unfinished hats that they didn't get done. So they can go in and sit down with the teachers and help them to finish things. So those you can, same thing. Sometimes it's on our website. Sometimes you can go into Chehalis. But after COVID, there are events like that you can just kind of look at the websites to see when those open up.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we are going to move forward because we're getting low on time.
Okay.
So this I know you're almost done.
Okay, this slide is projects that Nisqually Tribe is involved in, because a lot of people, a lot of times what we're looking for, like when people do say, how can we help? We're always just looking for support, with any way that we can, because we do get involved in these projects, and we just like people to help us, especially with all of these, like with climate change and that kind of stuff. So some of the projects is Nisqually State Park, which is up in the Michelle Ohop. That's the map there, and I don't know if anybody else sees it, but I do. I said it looks like a Godzilla monster if you look at it. But that's an outline of where it is. And the reason there's that space is it's because of land ownership. The tribe owns part of that, and then the state owns the other. And this has been an ongoing project. They started it, were funded, and then they didn't get funded, and so there was a lapse. And then now they've picked it back up. And I think Inslee had done one where he wanted to have more funding for parks. So this is a co-managed park that will be between the Nisqually and the state. Renaming the refuge to Billy Frank. Nisqually was involved in that. The statue in honor of Billy Frank, which will be back in DC. The tribe will be involved with that. I-5 project, there's a lot going on with that they're concerned with the Nisqually River, how it's going to affect the I-5. So they're kind of trying to look at it now as to what they can do and how they can avoid some of these things. They're really concerned about the changing of the river, and if it floods, what could happen. Land acknowledgement, which you guys have been doing, that's a big thing that we're trying to get, different agencies, different places to really acknowledge that, because, what we talk about is it was really our ancestors, that sacrificed a lot, for what, for us to still be here, so we always, it's like things we do is to honor our ancestors of what they fought for. Interpretation with other agencies, we've got a lot of that where people want interpretation of, tribes, the traditions, all that stuff with the plants, the land. So we're really involved in that with just different agencies. Next slide.
Oh. I accidentally paused it. There we go. Hold on. Sorry.
I think we're on 22. Yeah, 21. Okay, this one is sources. So this one I would like people to really take note of, because this is where when people contact me on the email, if you do contact me, these are some of the things I will tell you to look into. I get a lot of requests and I tell people, do this first. And then if you don't get the information, then come back to me. So, because a lot of them are different places and some are new to the to the area. So the first source, the Nisqually Indian Tribe, we do have a website. So if you're looking for any kind of departments, any kind of, help, anything, those are, we do have the departments on the website. Nisqually Indian Tribal Newsletter, that's on the website. You can, review those newsletters to see what's going on at the tribe if you, have an interest in what they're doing. Cecilia Carpenter, she was our Nisqually historian. Her books are that's where I send people all the time, because she did a lot of the research for the tribe, and her main concern was that history wasn't written by, tribal people. So she wanted the Nisqually history written by a tribal person. She was a tribal member. They're out of print, but the tribe, we're working on getting them, we're working on reprinting, you can find them in the library. We're hoping to get them into the schools with their school curriculum. The Puyallup Nisqually book, that's a Marion W. Smith. It's out of print, but you can find copies of that. And that tells a lot on the Nisqually history, traditions. Where the Michelle Meets the Nisqually, the Michelle Massacre of 1856 book by Abby Wanacott. That's a really good book. It tells the other side, of what happened during the wartime, with the militia. So I always recommend it. And I do recommend it for tribal people also, because I tell them, you just won't understand what your ancestors went through until you read that. It's hard to read for some, but it's something that you need to read to understand what they went through. Remember Drums by Jerry Ekram, he did his book. It's a really good book. And I think he's currently with the Fort Nisqually. He works at Fort Nisqually. Next slide. So the other Thurston County Water, Wood, and Prairie book, editors Sandra Crowell and Shirley Sterling. This one we helped with that one when they on the Nisqually part of it. So there's a lot in there. And then it also does the area. So it's really good to get to know, Thurston County. Yelm Project, that was done by a teacher. He's passed, but he did a lot of work on this. So YelmHistoryProject.com. He's done a lot that talks about, the Nisqually area because of the Yelm, being in Yelm. Pacific Northwest Quarterly, Scholarly Journal of Northwest History, published by the University of Washington. They have a lot to do because it's Pacific Northwest, so you'll find tribal, they'll do tribal writings on that. Historylink.org, there's a lot that people write on there. We're working with them, on really making sure the information is correct. The Native American census, a lot of people, when they're looking up things, they don't realize there's a Native American census that can help with, if you're doing any research on families or, tribes. And then Leschi, you can go online, anybody that has questions on Leschi, there's a lot of information online. And then here's a list of Cecilia Smith Carpenter books. They Walked Before, Leschi, Last Chief of Nisquallies, Fort Nisqually, How to Research American Indian Bloodlines, Where the Water Begins, that's on Mount Rainier. Fears of Internment, that's really a book that I would recommend people, if they can get it, to read that one. It talks about what happened during the war. For people that were supposedly non-hostile, what they had to go through on these internment camps. The Nisqually My People, it's a thorough book. Like I said, we're going to work on getting these all republished. Remembering Medicine Creek, she did that with Maria Pasquale, I think I pronounced her name right. And that one talks about the treaty, it just talks about what happened during treaty time. Stolen Lands, about the condemned, when they condemned the lands, what happened to the people. And the Nisquallian Tribe with Maria Pasquale, that has a lot of photos. So those are the books that she's written.
That's it. All right. So we will continue to take questions. We can go after the time of 7:30 if you're good with that, Nessie.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll answer what I can.
All right. We'll see what we can get through. All right. Let's open it up to Tim Ransom, who had a question.
Thank you, Nessie, for being with us and sharing tonight. It's been really great. You began your story with the history of the tribe with the treaty in 1854. But are there stories of where the first peoples came from many generations before that time?
And that's been a hard question because tribes always practice oral history.
Yes.
It was always passed down. There wasn't anything written. I tell people, really, you need, any researchers, which I know you are because of your book, to research I pick up any journals. I actually go to antique stores and pick up, any books that I can get that were written, because some of them that aren't really accurate, they will give you a place, they will give you certain, even though maybe some of the names have changed of these places, they give you that area of where tribes were, The other difficulty is depending on who was writing the name, who was interpreting, one tribe can have be written 4 different ways, but it's one tribe. So really you have to sift through all of this stuff and kind of pull out that, this was one tribe. There's not 4 tribes, they just spelled it different. I found that when I did research with the census, they were saying just go, put in the first 4 letters and then research, because people will spell, the name different. And so you really have to follow through that when you're doing research. So that's, Cecilia, like I said, she, to me, did the most thorough, her and Marion Smith. Marion Smith, with hers, she actually lived, among Nisqually, Puyallup, she didn't just go and, just get stories. She actually was there and sat with the people. I've always been interested in getting her handwritten because I know some of the people that she's talked to, and it's been really hard for elders to talk about it because of how you were treated, or your identity was taken away. My mom, I always tell the people about my mom, saying when she asked her mom why she didn't teach them the language or their Indian names, she's because I didn't want you to get in trouble, so there was a lot of things that happened back then that just that identity part wasn't there. So a lot of tribes, it's oral history. That's a part of what we're trying to do, is talk to the elders, try to get them comfortable with us so that we can get these stories out of them, of the past, because they just really shut down because of how, it's that historic trauma. So like I tell people, just read it, read other, anything you can get on the explorers. and not necessarily for their story, but for you can see the location. Because like I said this in Fort Nisqually, you know, when these explorers and everybody came, they were claiming this land for their country, and it was like it wasn't unclaimed land. You know, they ate with the tribal people, they, you know, socialized with tribal people. It was like they were already here, you know, so it wasn't unclaimed land, but that's what happened. So there's a lot of writing in there that I look through just to see the area, you know, where they, you know, they actually would take their either some of their ships or, you know, get on a canoe and go places. So that's what I always look for.
Thank you.
All right, next question from Mary Lane.
My question went back to the part of your talk when you were talking about the tribe buying back land. So I wondered whether you're able to incorporate that into the reservation so that it's protected and can't be sold off again, or whether you just hope that won't happen.
No, you can, and that's through the, you have to go in and there's a process that you have to go in and get it in trust. And once in there, the process means that the tribe, and it's, you know, it's just always going to be this way. The tribe has to prove that they were actually on that site one way or, you know, somewhere along the line. So if the tribe can say, you know, yes, this is where we went and fished. The TIPO department, the Tribal Historic Preservation Office, that's become very important to tribes, because in that research, you find that where archaeologists have, you know, they're digging, or like if you have a developer that's planning on, you know, putting something on this land, before they dig, they have to get a permit, and then they have to look at, was there cultural resources there for any of the local tribes. So this is where we get into the overlapping, you know, land. But with that process, once the tribe purchases land, you know, they look at it, and that's what they look to see. Was there, you know, a camp there? Was there a village? Was there a gathering place? You know, what was there beforehand? And that's where the TIPOs come in, because they can get the information in their research to see, you know, what was there before. And that's why I was saying, a lot of times when we go into presentations, that's why I want people to go back before the treaty, because what was there before the treaty? Fort Steilacoom is a good example. It was a military fort, but what was there before that fort got there? You find a lot of these places were put up where there were tribal villages, you know, because there was the water resource, there was, you know, the plants that they needed, there was the hunting area. So you find that, and that's what we're always looking for, and to protect that land. So once it goes into trust in the tribe's name, it is protected.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now we'll take a question from Barbara Davis.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we gotcha.
This is a question back at the first map that you showed. And I just wondered, over on the left hand, there was something, it started with a Q. It looked kind of like the word Quileute, but it was a village. Can you tell me what that is? That a cultural resource of some kind? Yeah, is that it? Let's see. Well, so there was a map with a little more detail. There's over by Medicine Springs. Now I can't see. I thought I saw some kind of a village over there.
Medicine Springs.
Oh yeah, it says something Quileute. I'm sorry, my eyes aren't good enough. It's over by, it says Pettit Property, Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission.
Oh, Klamath.
Yes, what is that?
Oh, is that Klamath Village?
Yes.
Okay, that was, I'm sorry, I laughed. That was actually Lacey Gateway. So it's land that the tribe has had for a while, and that's what they're calling it, because they're getting ready to look at what they're going to put on it. And so they've called it Klamath Village.
Oh, so it's not a historic name.
It is when they go into what was at the site.
Oh, okay.
So that's why they've named it that. But in the, property, I'm not good at that stuff. In the property sections, that's what it used to be, is Lacey Gateway. And so now as we're doing surveys and what they can do with the land, that's what their intent is calling it Klamath Village.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Now we'll ask a question from Dan and Cindy Tufford.
Yes, I was just curious what you think of the book, The Bitter Waters of Medicine Creek by Richard Kluger that was published several years ago.
That one was kind of controversial because of the way the book was written and some of the things that was put in it. You have to be very careful. What I tell people is tribes are very unique because everybody's related. Back in the past, like my grandpa had 3 wives. So there's this whole family, he had that, I think he had, I want to say like 20 something kids between the 3 wives, So you have all these people that are related. So in the books, you have to be careful because when you're talking about something, you can be talking about a different family, but there's this relationship because of, so I think Lesha had 3 wives, just getting at how these relationships all happen. So in that book, the research that was done wasn't thorough in consulting the family. And like I tell people here, even with photos, I might want one photo put in one of our newsletters, but maybe my sibling, depending, and the same thing, it could be half brother or sister, but could say, I don't want that photo put out, that person. So you get into these situations like that. So in these books, that's kind of what happened with this one, was that Chief Leshai's descendant, their family was a little bit, how would you say it? It was just the way he portrayed Kalakala, who was their great-great-grandmother, I believe. But the book was already done, So when you're getting the research, you need to be very careful that you're getting thorough research from the whole family, because getting it by, if you got it from like a tribal leader, that doesn't mean that person, belongs to that family or has a say. So there's information in there that can be true, and then there's other information that can, hurt people. And like I said, it's just because in tribes, everybody's related. You're going, as you go back down the line, you just have to be careful of who you're talking to, and that making sure you're doing a thorough research as to who you should be talking to. So we're very careful of that in archives. When people come to us, it's like, there's some things we can't do because it's restricted, and we don't have the family's permission.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now we'll take a question from Bill Lindstrom.
Got it.
We can hear you.
I had a question that was actually answered partially, so I won't go into a whole lot of detail on that, but it revolved around the enterprising programs that you have and the expansion programs. Are these solely funded by the tribe, or are there grants available, non-tribal grants available?
Sorry.
Some of that. But I have another question too.
Okay.
I am not familiar with the Mashell massacre or the location. Can you kind of explain that a little bit?
That's up in the Eatonville area. And with this, the book,
okay,
Yeah, and that what the book is, that's where the Michelle, it's the Michelle, there's the big Michelle and little Michelle that join into the Nisqually River. But where that one, the reason the book, because of that book, Abby Wanacott, who's a teacher for Bethel, she had her students research that. She's always been a good researcher for the tribes up in that area. That's where she lives. And so her students did all of this research and come up to these, found all the information. And she told me how they, went about it. But it gets back to the time of war where, and we've talked about this for Nisqually, when the war was going on, if you weren't on an internment camp, you were considered hostile. You were considered a hostile Native American or Indian. And so who determines who's hostile? So you had the militia, you had the regular military. And as they're going out, because of all of the stuff that happened, and yes, there was probably small bands that were just out for war, but up there, it was, and actually, I guess you would say a part of the village that didn't go on the internment and that wasn't in the war. It was mainly women, elders, and children. And so you had the militia that went out, and it was just like they were told, every tribal person you see that's out there, you consider them hostile. So that's where the massacre came up, and Abby and her students, researched that and did the book on it. But the like I said, in oral history, things weren't written down. They did interviews for elders at the time that talked about what they knew, what happened up there. But a lot of the written that you get is actually from these, the people that were there, the militia, the soldiers, the different, that's who was writing all this stuff down, because they all kept journals. So that's where they got a lot of this information and the history of all of that. But yeah, that was up in the Eatonville area, and that's where the Michelle is. And that's actually where the Nisqually State Park will be, up in that area that they're working on.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right, now we'll take a question from Ann Chanel.
Hello, I'm here.
We can hear you.
Oh, good. I just wanted to ask a little bit more about the Wahilut School.
Uh-huh.
Is the curriculum designed by the tribe, or is it following OSPI? And do the enterprises of the tribe pay for the school then?
For the first question, it's a combination. They do a lot of culture. They really do a lot of culture down there with, like you've seen with the first salmon ceremony. They do language, they do all that. It is also run, because they are funded, so it is run by the OSI, whatever. But yeah, they receive funding for that. They're certified. They have to run, like a regular school, but they teach, they do a lot of culture. The funding that goes into that, they were supported by the smoke shop, but the smoke shop, because of, Billy Frank Jr. dying, his sister, the smoke shop isn't there. So they do, work on getting grants and other funding that they can to keep the school going. The tribe, I believe Puyallup Tribe helps them out, with their funding, because some of them are enrolled Puyallups that are on the Frank's Landing line land. So, and that's where the Wahilut School is.
Good, thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right, now we'll take a question from, I hope I say this right, Heather Vergotis. Hopefully they'll tell me what the correct pronunciation is.
Hi. Hello?
Hello, we can hear you.
Awesome. My name is Hathor Vergotis. So I was wondering, I'm just learning about the fish wars, and I have 2 kids, and I want to teach them about what happened and how important it was. And can you recommend some good resources for learning about that time period? And also, I don't know if you're old enough to remember back then, but do you have any recollections from that period of time?
Actually, no, I was small. I remember my mom talking about that, saying that we would go down to the Frank's Landing and she would sit in support. There probably is a lot online. If you go, they have darn it, I'll have to look. I would go through Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission. They'll give you some links on that because there is a group that, and I can't remember the name of it now, but it will be listed on Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission. I think that's northwestindianfisheriescommission.org.
Okay.
If you go on there, that you can get, resources from them, and they do have links. Some of the other tribes, like Puyallup, I would really go to Puyallup online and look at theirs, because I'm sure they have, a lot on the fish wars, because it was between Nisqually and the Puyallup where a lot of that happened. So those are the places that I could recommend you go, and like I said, look online under the Bolt, the Bolt decision. A lot of that will have a lot of the history also. It's more, it'll be a lot of reading, but it gives you, what led up to this, to the fish wars. Kind of like if you read the treaty, it tells you what led up to the Puget Sound Treaty Wars. So same thing with the Bolt decision, that would be a place to go to look up any background on that. And I'm sure they would give you links too as to, where to go to find more information.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now we'll go to Paula Lowe. That made me feel a lot like a talk show host. Paula, you're on.
Hi, this is Paula Lowe. This has been a fascinating discussion. So I live on Patterson Lake, and some of our residents have been asking about the early tribes' activities around our lake. So we're on Hicks, Patterson, and Long Lake, which is very near the tribe. And we know about some of the history around the 1930s. There were a lot of resorts here, but we don't know much about the history before that. So I'm just curious if you have any tribal history about the lakes in the area.
I would look up, like I said, I would have to refer back to Cecilia's research. I'm not sure on that, what would be out there online. I would research that online first. The only thing I always caution people too about is, unless you know the history of the lake or the name, sometimes they change. The names have changed throughout the years, depending, for whatever reason. I guess if somebody's bought them. But also the site with the new laws for the tribes, a lot of these sites are considered restricted. So the access to those is restricted, and that's where, like I said, our TIPO would come in. So we can research it. You can email me, and I can get back with you on that one, because I would have to look up to see what is allowed to give, because they don't really want the sites given out like as to what was there, because they want to protect it. They don't want people destroying it. So like I said, a lot of times when people go in to build and they get a permit, that's really what the permit is for, is because then it allows our TIPO people to go in and look all of that information up to see what was there, but there is research that has to be done because of any kind of name changes. The other thing is tribal people gave sites and places their own names, what they called it before, and it's usually in the Lushootseed language. So there's always that, looking that up too, to see where that place was, or that site, to go along with the area that it's now named.
Okay, thank you. And what's your email address?
It's Bullchild, last name, first name. So it's bullchild.annette at Nisqually, so NISQUALLY -NSN, so Nancy Sam Nancy .gov, GOV.
Okay, thank you.
If you have trouble finding it or remembering it, anyone can email me. I'm on the Lacey Museum website, and I'll give it to you. All right, now we'll go to Sandy Crowell.
Sandy, I know Sandy.
Yep.
Hi, Sandy.
John, are you helping me out here?
She needs to unmute her microphone.
Okay. Maybe she stepped away. We'll go to someone else. How about Tony and Heidi Usabelli?
There we go. Thank you very much. I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about how the tribe has been involved with the NAGPRA, the Native Grave Protection and Repatriation Act with respect to human remains. Has that been something that the tribe has been engaged with?
Yes, and that's where I was referring to the THPO, the Tribal Historic Preservation Office. That's their main responsibility to protect. And so that's, like I said, a lot of these laws that came in, I tell people, these were laws that were created by tribes, for tribes, specifically for that protection. So that's kind of what the THPO, which we call it, that's their job, is for that, is to do all of those laws that have come into effect. So the NAGPRA, we work with, like I said, a lot of the museums, you know, we have the Native American Board that's with the Burke, and that's the consulting part of it to help them to work through all of these things with artifacts, human remains. Anytime a developer or a landowner discovers bones, that's the first place they get in touch with is our THPO. And then our THPO go into researching and go out to monitor to see what was out there and, you know, what was there before. So that's their specific duty now, is with the THPO to be involved in that. And a lot of tribes have those. A lot of tribes have the THPO departments now, and that's what they do.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I think we'll take one more question and then we'll call it a night. People are starting to drop off. I think they're getting tired. And just FYI, we had someone from Portugal on with us tonight.
Wow.
They had a pretty specific question, so I'm going to email you about it tomorrow. But
okay.
We'll take the last question from Loretta Sepanen.
Oh, thank you for taking my question. Has to do with that 1917 action of the military taking over the land, and really the dream that you mentioned, Nettie, about someday being able to get all of that land back to the tribe. What kind of steps, I presume there are many of them, would need to take place to achieve that dream?
Well, I would think first the legal part of it. And like I said, now with these laws that have been created for tribes, that's really helped support that. I think the tribes really need to look at what it's used for, because in the agreement, it was when there was no time of war, that land was supposed to go back, but it was never followed through. The way the agreement was written, it was written on top of a reservation at the time. And I believe, I'd have to look on the allotments, you know, that there's steps I think that you would have to look at to go through each part of that to see what happened when and how it happened and how it shouldn't have happened. Because like I said, at the time, treaties were, you know, the law of the land, you know, that covered everything, and it really shouldn't have happened. You know, that when they condemned that, it wasn't just tribal people. You know, the part of, like I said, what I always call Fort Lewis, you know, I know they condemn non-tribal people's land. So you just really, all of that was taken away from you. But on the reservation, you know, nobody had that authority really, except in the treaty, you know, it was supposed to be the president, but there was supposed to be a reason for it. So a lot of those places that are on these sites, what people have talked about, even our elders, is the land that they took was the pristine land that the tribe owned, you know, and it's very, you know, there's a site they call the Exeter Springs. It's where the springs bubble up from, you know, underneath. and it's just someplace to go where it's just, I can see why they would want that protected, you know. So we would have to go back into that process of getting them to clean it up, you know, go back, I guess you would say work backwards, you know, in why we would want that back. Right now they have the Clear Creek hatchery, you know, and that was kind of it happened, but it didn't just happen because, you know, the tribe wanted to put the hatchery there. There was a lot of process going through that. So I think it's something that we have to look into, because there are a lot of sites like down by by DuPont, the Sequalitcha Creek down there. We use the solo access with a solo boat launch, but see, that's a site that belonged to Nisqually. There's fishing areas around there, and really we should have access back to that. But that's the same thing, that's under the military, you know. So we're trying to go through on this cultural part of it to prove, you know, what we were there. Shell middens are a big deal that help tribes because it proves you had a camp there, you know. So as these are being found, you know, that's where our TIPO people come in. They're really important because they go out and monitor and look at these sites. And a lot of our people, a lot of tribes are really trying to get their people into, you know, becoming archaeologists and that, so that they can go out there themselves and monitor. They usually just go out with an archaeologist that makes sure they're, you know, watching over. And the tribal side of it is you're identifying things that somebody else wouldn't know, you know, that a tribe had or used, you know, for some, like I said, baskets, cedar, you know, any of that. So that's why the tribal people, the monitors go in so that they can identify a lot of these flakes. You know, it's a big thing for people to look at something and the, you know, tribes say, that's a flake, you know. That's where we had a, you know, hunting area. So that's kind of my goal. You know, I've talked to some of the other tribal people in council, you know, I would like to have that happen. And if we had to get it piece by piece, you know, I'm okay with that. But there's some places I would really like that should be protected. Right now, that site that we're talking about, a lot of these are what were considered the, we do the Leshai Quamuth Walk, and that's done annually if, you know, we're not in COVID. And that goes to show all of the sites, you know, the old homesteads, where the tribes had land, you know. So that's what I want to go about trying to, like I said, if it has to be piece by piece, I'm okay with it, but let's get it done.
Let me unmute myself again. Well, I think I speak for everyone when I tell you that was so interesting, and we thank you so much for sharing your time with us tonight. We hope we'll see everybody at our next History Talks, and have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.